All right, team, here we go. Here we go. Shh. Yeah, I'm talking to you guys. Shh. Thanks. Okay, here we go. Next session. Couple of really interesting presentations to start off this next session. And the first one is from a fellow that I'm really excited to have just met for the first time, even though we've exchanged work emails for a number of years. And this is James Floyer. He's originally from the UK, and he's been in Canada for the last 18 years, involved in avalanche forecasting for some method or the other. Avalanche forecaster for Avalanche Canada. What are you, the forecast program supervisor? So you tell other people what to do, and they look at you like, you know what you're talking about, huh? But, sorry, that was kind of rude. But James has done some really interesting research on temperature-triggered avalanches and on forecasting for places where there isn't data. And he's come up with something called the Dangerator. And I don't really know what this thing is, but I'm really excited to learn about it. So, James, for you.
Thanks, Lynn. Supervisor is just a euphemism for middle management. It just means you get shit from both below and from above. So that's all that means. I'm really honored to be here. Yeah, it was a real honor to get an invitation from Lynn to come and talk here. We've got a curious problem in Canada, and I suspect it's not a unique problem. And more we're seeing folk go into the backcountry in areas for which there's no public avalanche forecast. That might be areas that just don't have a forecast available, or it might be that people are going into areas that there is a public forecast for, but at times when that forecast isn't available, so either early season or late season. So as a result of that, about a year ago, we started a project to try and address that issue. And this is what we came up with, basically, and it's called the Dangerator, which is a little bit of a funny name, but for those of you that have any knowledge of the Canadian avalanche landscape, we also have a tool called the Evaluator, and I'll speak a little bit about that. So the Dangerator, Evaluator, those names are somewhat designed to be synonymous, so we thought it was a little cheesy, but we were going to roll with it. So if I can figure this out. Like with many of these initiatives, it's very much a collaborative effort. So there's a lot of people involved with this, mostly internal to Avalanche Canada. As Lynn said, I'm the forecast program supervisor. I'm responsible for the winter forecasting operations, basically. But there's a lot of other people involved with that, and a lot of the forecasters involved, and especially our communications department as well had a hand in this. And this is what it is, and I have some. They're hot off the press, actually. We've been working pretty hard to get them available for this winter. It's a physical card. Maybe down the line we'll go the app route or online or something like that. But for now, we've chosen to start at least with a physical card. It's designed to be a simple method to estimate avalanche danger. It's designed for use in areas not served by public avalanche forecasts. So especially at this time, we're recommending that if you are going to an area that is served by a professional avalanche forecast, that's probably your best bet. So we're not really kind of giving people a license to distrust their local avalanche forecasters. So we're suggesting it's for recreational backcountry users. Again, professionals have got their own methodologies and stuff like that. It's intended during the trip planning phase, I guess. So, what we recommend is you'd utilize this tool in a trip planning phase, and it's kind of designed to be used in conjunction with our evaluator here. And like I said, I'll go a little bit into detail, and it sort of wraps up into the Canadian avalanche skills training system here. But I think there's a lot of stuff in there, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to take something for use out of this, especially if you are someone that does tend to push into different areas or recreates at sort of odd times in the year. So here it is. Just start with it right off the bat. And I'm going to take you through this, but basically the idea is you sort of move left to right here, and you start with an assumption that the danger is considerable. And might roll your eyes and say, well, danger is always considerable in the middle of the winter. And there's a certain truth to that, but there's also a certain validity to that and why that might be the case. And I will sort of get into that. And then there's basically 2 steps here that allow you either to go up to high or down to moderate. And if you don't go either of those places, then you end up back at considerable. So starting with considerable makes sense because I argue that the factors that would raise you up to high are fairly obvious. Even in an area where there isn't an avalanche forecast, where there isn't much data available, these factors are, should be quite obvious. At least that's what we're arguing here, and I'll take you through that in just a sec. If you start with considerable and you don't go up to high, then the considerable danger assumes that there's something structurally wrong with the snowpack. And so, again, if you don't go up to high, then you're not necessarily hosing yourself if you don't have enough information to go down to moderate. You still assume that the avalanche danger is considerable, and again, if you start with that as your starting point, that's not to say that you wouldn't ever modify that assumption as you gain more familiarity and more knowledge with the area that you're writing in. But at least you're assuming that there is something structurally wrong with the snowpack. So, step 1 is the critical loading or critical warming. So these are our meteorological type factors that, if they're present, if either one of these isn't present, so that's the or there, then you raise it up to high. And so critical loading, let's just take a look at those factors. Critical loading, do you expect loading of roughly 30 centimeters of new snow, that's about a foot, significant wind transport or rain to occur during the period from 24 hours prior, so that's the previous day, basically, up to the end of the day of travel. So you're basically combining recent observations with the forecast amount for the day of travel. So you've got to do a little bit of homework here. It's the best situation is if you have some kind of remote weather station you can call up on. If you don't, you might be able to make some personal observations. Maybe somebody else has been out in that area and they've reported on how much new snow there is or has been over the last 24 hours. But if none of these are available, you can kind of even just look out of your window or as you're getting ready and you're scraping the snow off your truck or whatever it is, you get some information about how much recent snow there is. And you can combine that, and certainly where we are in Canada, I know for a fact, because I've seen a lot of the products that are available in the States, there's some really excellent forecast products to allow us to get the amount forecasted for the day in question. So you combine those amounts, and if your totals are more than sort of 12 inches of snow, then we're suggesting that that's going to, as a safe starting point, equal to a high avalanche danger day. Critical warming, do you expect a rapid rise in temperature to near or above 0 degrees C? I guess you guys can convert that to F. To the upper snowpack become wet or due to strong sun above freezing air temperatures or rain. And so again, what do you want to do? We're suggesting using a forecast product here because we really want to project out into the midday temperature, so the highest daytime temperature. So really we want to be looking at the midday or the afternoon temperatures in the area that you're going at approximately the right elevation. So where to look? We're really recommending that you drill down into the local weather forecast products to try and determine if you're seeing those rapid rise in temperatures to close to 0 C. So that's our high danger. The next step is to ask, can we go down to moderate? And if we go down to moderate, we have to answer yes to all 3 of these questions. So there has to be no recent loading, and there has to be no recent slab avalanches, and there has to be no persistent slab problem. This is a little bit of a higher bar. It's going to require a little bit of legwork, and you may not always be able to answer all of these questions. But let's just run through these factors quickly. So recent loading, this is similar to the critical loading. Actually, it doesn't really matter if you get it wrong, because you're probably going to come up with a similar answer. But rather than the last 24 hours, we're looking at the last 48 hours. We're not considering the forecast amount so much, because that's already been dealt with in the critical loading. But we're looking at the past 48 hours, and again, roughly a foot of snow during that time. And again, similar kind of places, remote weather stations, your own observations. Maybe there's been posts, social media posts. We have a mountain information network, which is a crowdsourced repository for information about avalanche conditions, snow conditions, and weather conditions. So those are your areas that we're recommending that you get that information for. If you haven't been, maybe you've been there the previous day, yesterday, and then you can use your own observations, obviously. Slab avalanches. Are there signs of slab avalanches in the area from today or yesterday? So again, the last 48 hours, basically. And what to do, ask other riders if they've seen or heard of avalanche activity, basically, in that area. And similar, you may have some of your own observations. You may have seen a post on the Mountain Information Network or other social media sites. And we're saying, especially for large avalanches, maybe you want to include some of the observations from nearby areas. You know, maybe there's a more of a regional avalanche situation, and you probably should pay attention to those. Persistent slab, this is probably the hardest factor, at least for recreationists who are coming into it, maybe don't have a lot of experience. Is there a persistent or deep persistent slab problem in the snowpack? We're suggesting that people scan through observations that may be available, again, on social media or through the Mountain Information Network, or maybe talking to people who've been there in the past, looking for specific words like easy and sudden that may kind of clue people into unstable conditions that might suggest a persistent or a deep persistent slab problem. In Canada, we also release special public avalanche warnings, and we now partner with Parks Canada as well, and those are actually they cover quite a large region, or they can do at least if conditions warrant it. So we do things like that as well, and you know, there's various posts and blogs that get written about these kind of things. So if you can answer yes to all of these, so if there's no recent loading and no slab avalanches and no persistent slab problem, then we're suggesting you can go down to moderate. If you don't, if one of these is present, or if you're not confident, if you're not sure, so there's really been nobody that's been out in the area that you go to, we're suggesting the starting point should be then to default to considerable. Maybe on the subsequent day, you'll have been able to do some work to actually gather this information so that you kind of know what holes there are in the situation, then you'll be able to fill them in by gathering your own data, in which case you may be able to adjust this on subsequent days. So it only allows an estimation of moderate, considerable, or high danger. It doesn't allow you to go as high as extreme, and it doesn't allow you to go down to low. In reality, the loss of extreme is not a big loss because as professional forecasters, we go there so rarely. That's probably another discussion, actually, whether or not we should be going there more often. But at least, you know, in Canada, we go there very rarely. The loss of low is a bigger loss, and the basic answer we have is if you riding, skiing, or snowmobiling in terrain for which you would want a low avalanche danger, then you should be getting additional avalanche training. So you need more training. You need your own ability to assess that if that's your aim, if you really want to ride that kind of terrain that you really need a low avalanche danger for. We're not separating this out by elevation band. It's just a one elevation band. It's just a one single estimation of danger. And these terms that we just went through they're consistent with terms that you find in the evaluator here. And this allows us to sort of tie this whole concept into our Avalanche skills training courses. Maybe I'll just back up here. These Avalanche skills training courses, in Canada, we have quite a good buy-in to these courses, and there's a common curriculum around them. But the curriculum is very much based around this idea of the evaluator. And there's two places where that comes in. There's a trip planning aspect of that, and then there's a slope evaluation aspect where you kind of actually in the field potentially using the card, or at least going through the factors associated with that. And both of them rely on having a regional avalanche danger. And so we've noticed that there's a real problem there. There's a disconnect because in our courses, we're teaching concepts that rely on having an avalanche danger rating, which is fine if you live and recreate an area where there is an avalanche forecast. But if you're outside of those areas, and in Canada there are many places where that's true, then the whole methodology and the whole basis for these avalanche skills training courses is falling apart a little bit. So that was one of the major drivers for us to want to develop this Dangerator. I've probably said most of these things. So yeah, the basic idea is you want to match terrain to conditions. That's consistent with trying to be a responsible recreationist regardless of where you are. If you see things like this, you're going to want to back off and make different terrain choices compared with if things are nice and stable. This is what we're pushing in Canada as the recommended process. And so this isn't anything new, but we've just formalized it a little bit. And I suspect most of you in the room follow a process that's somewhat similar to this. It's going to look quite familiar, I think. But one of the first things you do is you assess conditions. So probably you're going to get the forecast. But if you don't get the forecast, now we've got a tool to enable you to estimate the avalanche danger. Then you're going on to plan your trip. And in the Canadian context, you might use the trip planner. You may have a different process for planning your trip, but you need that forecast information in order to be able to do that. Then you want to check your gear, make sure you've got the right gear for what you're doing, make sure it's all working correctly. Verify conditions. This is an interesting one. This is a little bit new for us, actually. There are certain conditions for which you might want to vary your trip before you even go. So we've got before, during, and after. So this is a kind of just before we're going trip. You may want to switch from your plan A to your plan B. And obviously the biggest case there is if there's a lot more snow. If you wake up and there's 14 inches of snow when there was only 3 or 4 inches forecast the day before, you're probably going to want to change your plan, even if the forecast said moderate conditions, good to go. Use good travel habits. There's been a lot of words said about that. And here's the next one, evaluate slopes. So again, in our Canadian context, the evaluator actually has, as one of the factors, a regional avalanche danger rating, because when we put this together, the evaluator together, it was found that the regional danger rating is very highly correlated to whether or not there's the likelihood of avalanches, basically. So it kind of makes sense, but we still need that piece from the forecast here. And then we're going to reflect on your day. And the first couple of talks we had today very much really drilled into that reflection and how important it is to reflect on both things that went wrong, but things that could have become a near miss. Was that a near miss? Was it not? Did we make the right choice? So this one here, and I've kind of said this already, but we've got the danger rating here. So this is what allows us to plan our trip and evaluate slopes. Here it is right here. It's the first of our avalanche conditions things here. And these are some of the areas that are really important to us, where we know that people are recreating in these areas, but there's no forecast. We do a conditions report. We don't have an avalanche forecast with danger ratings. Hopefully that's going to change in the near future. The Yukon up there near White Pass and Haynes Pass. We've got a little sliver. 3 people died in an avalanche about 4 years ago in a place called Hope Creek, right in the middle between 2 avalanche forecast regions there. The Central Coast here, pretty popular with more adventurous types. People definitely getting in trouble there. And if we zoom out to Canada as a whole, we've got more avalanche. These are the recreational avalanche fatalities in the last 100 years. And we've got clusters here that are around the Laurentian Mountains in Quebec. We've got people dying up in Baffin Island, places like that, the Mackenzie Mountains. You know, we don't have plans to expand our forecasting program, at least in the near future, to these areas, but yet people are still going there. And I suspect that's a similar situation in some parts around here. I'm not sure locally. It's an expert system. We did a little bit of numerical analysis to optimize some of the factors there. We did do some validation. I'm going to skip over that. If people do have questions about the validation, you can come find me. The critical number here is it's just around about 70% accurate, but if you take into account that over-prediction is probably better if you're going to an area that you know nothing about as a starting point, then the combination of accurate prediction here and over-prediction gives you a 90% hit rate. So we're only under-predicting 1 in every 10 days or even less than that. So there is this skew. There's this skew towards over-predicting. And that comes in because if you don't know anything about if you're not able to answer some of those questions, your default is to go back to considerable. So there's the skew towards over-predicting. It does tend to overestimate in spring conditions as well, some early conditions, and that's because the warming factor is a big factor initially when you first get a warming, but on subsequent warming, especially if you've got your diurnal spring cycles, you may estimate that warming has occurred, but at that point, the snowpack is starting to stabilize, and you're not seeing the danger actually raise as much as it might be predicted by the Dangerator. The whole thing is designed to emulate experts a little bit. So experts, guides, and other professionals, they tend to ease into a new area. So if you know nothing about it, and we heard those very words actually from some of the previous presenters. So it's recommending that you kind of do that. If you don't know much information about it, you're assuming a cautious approach, and then try and gather as much information as possible. And one thing the Dangerator does allow you to do is focus on what information might be good to gather and fill in the unknowns. So it's designed to estimate avalanche danger in areas where there's no avalanche forecast. It's designed to be really simple, using existing avalanche skills training concepts. We're pitching it to people who have taken basic avalanche training or who are taking basic avalanche training. So that would be a 2-day avalanche course. It's got reasonable predictive ability. It's not perfect. It's best in the midwinter. But it does have low under-prediction rates, which we're suggesting is a good thing. It permits the use of the evaluator in areas where there's no avalanche forecast. And we're hoping, from an organizational point of view, this is important to us, we're hoping it's really going to improve the user engagement. So rather than disconnect from the whole avalanche safety thing, if there's no services, if there's no avalanche forecast for your area, we're hoping to be able to engage people a lot more. These are some of our sponsors in Avalanche Canada. Love to see you guys up there if you are traveling and want to get some really good snow in the winter. It's awesome. So that's what I have. That's the Dangerator. I don't know if we have time for questions. Thank you.
I bet you that James would bring those to the bar for us.